Well, it's a 49ers kickoff special, and it's themed Trey Lance because we're Trey Lance days away from report day, number 5. 5 days away from report day. Special guest, Larry Krueger. Larry, your channel is so fun to watch. I know I was on a couple weeks ago, and then you said, hey, maybe I could come on your channel at some point. Great idea. Time to talk, right? Nice little collaboration here for our 49ers kickoff special. Welcome. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Dave. Good to see you, man. And man, getting ready for camp. It's a hot day in the East Bay. Coming from the gym, so I'm a little still sweating after my post workout shower. But let's do it.
So I understand it's really hot in California. I'm not going to make it out there till Monday. Well, it's actually hot everywhere in the nation except for the city of San Francisco. Did you see
Right.
the weather around the whole country is like 95 to 110. Death Valley's like 130. San Francisco is 62 every single day.
I was doing a live stream with somebody from Arizona the other night, and it was like 11 o'clock at night, and it was like 114 or something, 112 in Arizona at
Wow.
almost midnight.
Well, I'm in Nashville right now. This is where my wife is from, so I'm here for most of the off season, and it is hot, but it's in the 80s and steamy, like thunderstorms and stuff. The last couple of days, it's been weird. So it's a massive country, right? You get different weather everywhere else. But I've already peeked ahead at the forecast for training camp. It looks like it's going to be, I wouldn't say pleasant, but it's going to be, compared to other training camps, definitely going to be pleasant. Low 80s, sunshine. OTAs is the best weather in Santa Clara. We get the 70s, so we'll sweat it out a little bit, but you rarely ever get a cloud during training camp, right? Then when the 49ers go to Vegas to do the joint practice with the Raiders, they're going to have to practice really early in the morning because they're outdoors, I guess, in Vegas. So that's going to be before the 115-degree heat kicks in, but I still don't buy that it's going to be comfortable. It's still going to be hot, even if it's at 8 a.m.
Will you go Matt Mayoko camp hat, with the urban sombrero or whatever you
I got one of those for the safari that we went on in Africa, thinking we'd be out in the sun a little bit more, and we ended up being in a van, so I didn't need it. So I need to make use of it. One of those that kind of covers your neck, because your neck can burn. You definitely got to go hat though, because it's not 2-a-days anymore, but you're still out there in the middle of the day. I think the practices are going to start at 10:15, so you're out there from 10:15 to noon. And California sun is no joke. You're down here in the South where I'm at right now. They've got clouds all the time. You get a little bit of sun, a little bit of cloud cover. In California, it just pierces, right? It's the air is really clean, especially in the Bay Area. Kind of feel that UV is pretty unforgiving. So,
well, this camp is going to be juicy too, because I got to think the 49ers, with them being a Super Bowl contender and B kind of undecided to some degree at the quarterback spot. That right there, those two factors kind of make this maybe the most intriguing training camp of any in the league. Maybe I would say.
Yeah, I don't see how it could be more intriguing, because you listed the two main ingredients, contending team, and then you have kind of sub ingredients. Part of the contending team is you have a lot of star power, and the 49ers have retained every single A-list player except for DeForest Buckner over the past several seasons, right? So that number of star players has grown and grown and grown to the point where you walk around their locker room during the regular season and it almost feels like the Pro Bowl in there, right? You've got guys, Christian McCaffrey's in one corner, Trent Williams is in another corner, Nick Bosa's over there, Brandon Ayuk is a burgeoning star for the 49ers. I mean, you could go on with the list of really good players. They're all going to be on the field at training camp, so that makes it a special occurrence. Whenever you have that many good players in one spot, you're usually going to be a playoff contender, or otherwise something is really wrong. And then you have the drama of the quarterback position. And this is the first thing I wanted to ask you. Yeah. Obviously, you're on Twitter, you're on YouTube, you're doing all this social media. So you get to see the pulse of fans. That, to me, the interest in the quarterback position just is so absurdly large compared to anything else. And the 49ers have a good roster. There's a lot of good players. There's cool stuff to talk about. But whenever is the same experience for you whenever you put a question out or a tweet out or a video out about one of the 49ers quarterbacks, it like dwarfs. It's like 10x the size of talking about anything else. It seems to register a lot bigger mark with the fan base.
Well, and it's incredible and also somewhat disturbing. It's incredible from the standpoint of there's no you never get tired of talking about the quarterbacks because there's so many different angles to take. But it's also kind of disturbing because we have really likable, young, talented guys like Trey Lance and Brock Purdy, and yet there seems to be kind of like an anti-camp for both. Like there's people that Trey Lance, you saw Juszczyk describe him as beloved in the room. He's a likable young guy who's trying to carve out a career in the NFL, and he's done not one negative thing. He hasn't said one negative thing. He hasn't done one negative thing. He's done nothing but just try to get better and improve his craft. And Purdy has done nothing but just have success for the most part. And yet there are people that are lining up to bash both. And it's sad. I think it's really sad. It's I don't know where it's derived from. And, call me, whatever you want. But to me, I really have a lot of confidence that both guys, before it's all said and done, if you said like, be on record, stop, don't be on either, get off the fence and make a call. I'll call that. I think both these guys are going to be franchise quarterbacks in the future. I think both of them are going to have fine NFL careers as quarterbacks. And I don't get the people pushing back on Purdy saying it's not sustainable. And I don't get the people saying that Trey's a bust. I don't get it.
And add Sam Darnold into the mix. He seems to be the least popular out of all three of them, but you mentioned 25. His name. Yeah, and it's just met with fire online. I agree with you. It's ridiculous, and I think it's tribalism. That's what it is. And you see people having to park themselves in one camp, and when you park yourself in one camp, then just by nature, because you're not seeing the big picture, you're going to be throwing stones at the other camp, where that's completely incompatible with the way that any competent professional sports organization is going to try to work, right? Any competent professional sports organization is going to try to bolster the most important position with as many good players as possible. So whereas you have this kind of wrong thinking online, this really tribal thinking saying, if I like Brock Purdy, I've got to hate Trey Lance, or I've got to hate Sam Darnold. It can only be Purdy. And then the other side, if I like Trey Lance, I've got to hate Brock Purdy. I've got to hate Sam Darnold. Whereas people are thinking like that outside of football circles. Actually inside the building, that's not how the 49ers are considering this. They want as many good quarterbacks as possible. And to me, it's crazy that is not maybe it's a silent majority kind of thing. Maybe most people do think that. But to me, it's crazy that people are so vocal about it not being that way, about it being tribalistic, considering what the 49ers suffered through last year. They literally ran out of quarterbacks in the NFC Championship game. And the only reason they made it to the NFC Championship game is because they had several good quarterbacks. Right? Nobody argues about the running back room having too many good running backs. Nobody argues about the receiver room having too many good wideouts. Yet for some reason, there's an issue when the QB room has potentially more than one good quarterback. And to me, I agree with you, Larry. I don't think it makes any sense.
It's wild. And Dave, one of the things I love about your Twitter is that I gain so much information from your Twitter. And one of the stats that I read in one of these annual magazines that I thought was really interesting. Take away 2019, and the 49ers have gone 6 straight years where they've used at least 3 quarterbacks to get through the regular season. 6 years outside of 2019. So, you're going to kind of need everybody. These guys are not running for office. It's not like, one guy can be the president and everybody else loses. You're going to need all these guys. The other thing that I think is interesting is there's also kind of a relative, I don't want to call it ignorance, but, people go too far and they'll be like, keep all 4. And that's just not a reality. I mean, there's no way that Brandon Allen will be on the Niners practice squad this year. He'll either be the 3rd string quarterback or he'll be somebody else's 2 or 3. He's not going to take, in my estimation, Dave, he's not going to take an $835,000 pay cut just to be the Niners insurance policy on the practice squad. Because that's what 207, I think 207,000 is what you get on the practice squad. And I think the league minimum is like 750, and the average third string quarterback in the league makes about $1 million. So he's not making 200,000 to be on the Niners practice squad, even though it sounds good. And I know lots of people are like, keep all four. Well, that's not a reality, but I do understand the sentiment.
Yeah, and I think that, keeping 3 in the building is definitely something they're shooting for. One of those guys might end up on the practice squad, but 3 on the 53, one on the practice squad, I don't think is something that would be feasible for the 49ers. But they do want to arm themselves with as many options as they can when they're in this 90-man mode, with Brock Purdy's return still being up in the air. We'll find out a lot more. I can't wait till Tuesday or maybe Wednesday, the first practice, but Tuesday, Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch should have their first press conference. And that's when we're going to find out if they're going to put Brock Purdy on the PUP list, which I think at the start of all this, we expected him to start training camp on PUP because it seemed that would still be within his recovery window. We've gotten a lot of news over the course of the past couple months, little tidbits here and there that he's ahead of schedule, that everything's going well, that he's throwing down in Florida. If Brock Purdy is 100% ready to practice, the 49ers clear him. They obviously won't put him on PUP. He'll start practicing. But I think if he's anywhere less than 100%, you put him on PUP. And there's no downside to that. You could take him off as soon as he's ready. The one thing you can't do is put him on PUP after he's practiced. That's illegal. Once he's practiced, you got to ride with him, or he goes to IR, and obviously you don't want to put him on IR because that would end his season in training camp. So we're going to get our first really, really firm status report from the 49ers on Brock Purdy since the injury on either Tuesday or Wednesday when the PUP list opens up for training camp. If Brock is not on it, that means that, boy, the recovery's accelerated. The recovery is way ahead of schedule. If he's on it, then I think it probably still is on schedule. And that's when the drama would really start, right? If he's on PUP, because then you have Trey Lance, you have Sam Darnold, you have Brandon Allen. Those are your 3 quarterbacks that are practicing. And then Brock Purdy's going to be kind of lurking in the shadows, right? So we'll be talking about all the QBs competing at training camp. And then the favorite lurking in the shadows will be speculating as to when he may return.
Yeah. And the PUP, there's no deadline, right? So he could, it's not like he's got to be on there for 3 weeks or 5 weeks or 6 weeks. No. It's just as long as they want to. And they put Darrell Luter Jr. on the PUP yesterday or the day before. And I don't know what his injury is, but, so I guess we're going to find out. I don't, based on what I've heard, or, it sounds like Purdy will be ready to go sometime this summer, sometime in August, which means sometime during the preseason. But at this point, it's all kind of speculative, and we'll wait till Shanahan and Lynch kind of spit it out.
So this is a list of all the 49ers quarterback injuries since 2017. I wrote a piece on this a few months ago, and when I made the table for the injuries, I mean, it was just staggering how long it was. You could see it starts with C.J. Beathard's hip strain in 2017. That was against Seattle. And that's when Jimmy Garoppolo came in, when it was raining at Levi's, and Garoppolo came in for a few plays through the touchdown to Lewis Murphy. So, I don't know if it's fitting, ironic, whatever word you want to use, but Jimmy Garoppolo's tenure with the 49ers, which was marred by so many injuries, actually started because of an injury to the quarterback preceding him, C.J. Beathard. And then all the way down through Purdy's injury and then Josh Johnson's injury, which made the 49ers literally run out of quarterbacks in the NFC Championship game. So when that's the history, lost you there for a second. When that's the history, you've got to stock the room. And I think that's exactly what they've done this offseason, because we don't know Purdy's full status yet. The 49ers might still be waiting for that recovery to hit 100%. So for the time being, you carry 4. Once Purdy heals, if that happens in time before the 53-man roster cut down, which I think we expect, but we can't be sure. Once that happens, I think the 49ers can jettison one of these quarterbacks. But for the time being, what happened in Philadelphia should still be fresh in your memory if you're the 49ers. You touched the stove and you got burnt. You can't forget that you touched the stove and you got burnt. So insulate yourself from the stove. Make sure you have enough quarterbacks to survive a season or even survive training camp at this point.
And they've gotten guys like, so Brandon Allen was number 2 in Cincy. He's probably slated to be number 3 here. Sam Darnold was number 1, number 2 in Carolina. He, could be a number 2 here. I get the feeling that we may see a quarterback dealt because I think all these guys might be too good to just waive. And I think there might be a team that, if Trey Lance is awesome and Brock Purdy's healthy, maybe Sam Darnold gets dealt. The big question I would have is this: Brock Purdy makes $840,000, cheapest quarterback in football. Sam Darnold is due to make $5 million. Trey is due to make $9 million. Are the 49ers possibly going to keep a 2 and a 3 that would add to $14 million? I know they can because they have a very cheap number one. But Albert Breer kind of highlighted their 2024 cap challenge yesterday or the day before on, just looking at how many guys and how much money is tied up in big time stars. And is better than anybody that you can kick that, or you can roll over that cap savings into next year if you want. And I think that's going to be, the ultimate question as we get going on this thing. There'll be the competition, but then there's also the financial element. If Brock is healthy and is ready to go September 10th or whatever at Heinz Field, do the Niners commit $14 million to 2 and 3? Or do they choose between Trey and Sam, make Allen number 3, and roll some of that cap savings into next year so they can retain a higher percentage of their core players?
Well, if all these guys perform well in training camp, it gives them more options. And I think you see something similar happening at the kicker position, except that's a much less low-profile position, but it's the same philosophy that the 49ers are operating with. They're taking positions where there might be value to other teams for, some desire for these players at the 53-man cut down, and they're stocking up on players. So a kicker, they traded for Zane Gonzalez at essentially no cost, and then they drafted Jake Moody. Moody's probably going to be the guy, but hey, maybe you could turn around Zane Gonzalez and flip him before you cut him, right around that 53-man roster deadline if a team needs another kicker. Same deal at quarterback. Maybe a team is going to need a backup. Maybe somebody will be interested in one of these QBs, and you give yourself options if you're the 49ers at that 53-man roster cut down. That's what's going to make this training camp so exciting, because, not only are the 49ers going to be determining who's going to be starting week 1, because there could be some questions about that if Brock Purdy's recovery isn't going as fast as maybe we anticipated it was throughout this offseason. That's not going to be the only question. Other questions going to be how they comprise this entire quarterback room and how they look at this team from a budgetary sense heading into next year. You mentioned the cap issues. They have over $270 million in liabilities already on the 2024 books. And that's before Nick Bosa's contract, which hasn't been executed yet, obviously, is considered in 2024. So I don't know what the hit's going to be in 2024 for Bosa's contract. They might be able to keep it artificially low with some cap maneuvering, some of those bonuses that stretch out over the years, but it's still going to be at least $10 million, right? So that's $280 million in liabilities. For perspective, the cap this year was $224.8 million. It grows every year in general. There's been one exception during the COVID year. It didn't grow.
Right.
But we expect it to grow again. So it grows about 10 million every year. Say that it grows abnormally high next year. So say that it grows 15 million. 225 million plus 15 million is only 240 million. And I just said the 49ers are going to have 280 million in liabilities. That's just right now. So there's an $80 million delta there that they're going to have to figure out. And obviously there are tricks, there are ways that you can move the puzzle pieces around. But Larry, I liken the cap to a sink that is filling up with water. You could let some water out, but you got to make sure that you're not filling up that sink too fast, because once that sink breaks the surface and starts flooding everywhere, you're screwed. That's when you enter cap hell. We saw a team enter cap hell this offseason. It was the Rams.
Right.
They had to cut 3 or 4 quality veterans because they let that sink run over. So the challenge for the 49ers is going to be keeping that sink near full, but not letting it overflow. And they've got to think about the future, not just this season with that cap money.
And there's other spots on this roster that, there may be cap savings. Like a lot of people think Jawan Jennings is going to be on this team for sure. But if Ronnie Bell and Tay Martin play really well, could the Niners save money there? They could. And then what happens if Jake Moody, doesn't, what happens if Jake Moody's got a really strong leg, but, really has a rough beginning? Will the 49ers, bypass the cap savings of the rookie kicker for the veteran, or even try to bring in a Robbie Gould back off the free agent market. Is that ship sailed? They've got some different younger players they could go with on both sides of the line of scrimmage and have some cap savings. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be really interesting to see who makes this roster. And I expect the 49ers, I look at this roster, Dave, and I see 3 or 4 positions that are so loaded that I think the players that the Niners may cut to get down to 53 might be the kinds of players that other teams might give you a day 3 pick to acquire. Like, I think the Niner linebacking core is so good and so talented that if the 3 rookies play well and Marcelino plays well, they got 3 really good special teams linebackers in Flanagan Fowles, the Stanford kid Curtis Robinson, and of course Oren Burks. And somebody may offer you a late round pick for one of those guys if it looks like they're not going to make the roster. You may see Lynch engage in some trades towards the end of camp where they get a day 3 pick for a player that maybe we all kind of thought was slated to make the roster.
Well, I just popped open the depth chart that I keep on Google Sheets, and I highlighted the linebacker room just so we can illustrate what we're talking about. The left side of this right here with the gold headers, that's my projected 53. The right side to the right of this middle dividing line are the guys that aren't going to make it. And I'm not sure about the linebacker position, just like you aren't sure who's going to make it, who's not. Right now, I have D. Winters out of the rookies making the team, Jalen Graham not making it, and I have Marcelino McCrary-Ball not making it, but that's a total guess. I'm spitballing at this point. I need to see this at training camp. There's a good chance that McCrary-Ball, who's been in the system now for a year, has a leg up over the rookies, Winters and Graham, and he makes the team, and neither of these 2 rookies make the team. I mean, they're 6th and 7th round picks, respectively. McCrary-Ball is an undrafted free agent. So the 49ers, they don't believe that they owe any of these guys a roster spot, which, if they end up being good players is another testament to how well they're, unearthing talent in the late rounds. But just like kicker, just like quarterback, what you see here is a deep roster where the 49ers project to have some options at cut down day. And when you do have those options and when your team is respected as a place that has a lot of talent, you become a place where other teams are more likely to say, hey, I'm going to send you a 6th round pick for this guy. Right. And that's power if you're the 49ers, because we know that 6th and 7th round picks are picks that they've succeeded with in the past. Brock Purdy is the illustration of that. Brock Purdy was the very final pick of the draft. So you can't say that a 6th or 7th rounder that the 49ers pick up at the cut down this year is meaningless, because it could become somebody like Brock Purdy in the future with how well they've scouted and selected in those rounds.
Oh, that's a great point. And also, when you listen to the Niners talk about Braden Willis, hey, they may have taken Braden Willis in the 3rd round. I think once you get to round 3 and 4, it becomes beauty in the eye of the beholder. And oftentimes in a deep draft, an undrafted player could be somebody that, like, I'd love to know what round grade do the Niners really have on Jalen Graham? Because, just talking to the linebacker coach, you can tell he loves him. He thinks that Jalen Graham's a really good player. And McLuhan, in the article the article that you wrote or Matt wrote?
Matt Barrows wrote for us at The Athletic. Yeah,
that was a great piece. And McLuhan, you got to remember, he was hot to trot on Talanoa Hufanga. Well, he was equally hot to trot, it sounded like, on Jalen Graham, Dave. So maybe Jalen Graham is, McLuhan's a very good personnel guy. And, and I'll say this, I didn't see anything from Jalen Graham in the minicamp that told me that he's not going to make this team. He looks really, really good to me. So we'll see. We'll see. That's what, this is going to be a really loaded roster. And a camp is usually determined by what kind of competition there is. And, and this is where I want to give some credit to Lynch, because when the Niners went to Shanahan and Lynch, I love the Shanahan hire. I wasn't sure of the Lynch hire. I knew Lynch was smart. I knew Lynch was capable, but he also had no experience in the job. And now I really look at the job that he's done, Dave, and I think that the 49ers under John Lynch consistently are producing one of the NFL's deeper rosters. And I think you got to give him and Peters a lot of love for their day 3 and post-draft pickups. And I think the Niners are a unique team. You already mentioned it. They've got star power all throughout their locker room that's the envy of the league. Usually that's a trade-off, meaning that the back of your roster is filled with some guys who are kind of borderline. They don't have borderline guys in the back of their roster. They've got really deep back end of their roster and stars. So it's one of the reasons that the 49ers, despite the questions at quarterback, are still very much a Vegas, one of the favorites in Vegas to win the whole thing.
Well, one of the favorite pieces that I wrote this offseason, I got to talk to John about how they
work the comp pick
formula. Yeah, this was back in April. I got to talk to him for a bit at the NFL owners meetings. And I mean, this is exactly what you're talking about, Larry.
Yeah.
The 49ers have been able to build a core of star players that they've been able to fit under the salary cap by paying these guys while the cap is increasing. But then they've realized, okay, that core obviously can't be all 53 guys. That core right now is probably 6 players, maybe 7 players big. It's going to get bigger every year as the cap gets bigger, assuming that you develop your top draft picks, or in George Kittle's case, your 5th round draft pick into a star. You can pay those guys, but the margins of your roster have to be filled by players that you unearth in scouting, either in rookie scouting, so you find them and you're able to draft them with later draft picks, or in bargain bin free agency scouting. And the 49ers, John Lynch has overseen this because he's the general manager. I don't think he's doing all of the grunt work on the ground, but he gets a lot of credit because he has entrusted the right people with the right jobs. And the 49ers have a great sense of communication between the scouting department and the coaching staff. And the coaching staff very clearly articulates to the scouting department, this is who we need. These are the skill sets that we need for these positions. And that allows the scouting department to go out and look for very specific skill sets and find value in the 5th, 6th, 7th round, or even in undrafted free agency. I think at this point, it's not an accident that the 49ers have so many hits in the 5th round. George Kittle, Talanoa Hufanga, Dre Greenlaw, those are 5th rounders. Elijah Mitchell is a 6th rounder. Kittle, obviously the 5th rounder. Brock Purdy, 7th rounder, right? Jawan Jennings, we just talked about him. He was a 7th rounder. It's not an accident that the 49ers hit rate in these lower rounds is so high, and that's because they're looking for very specific skill sets communicated by their coaching staff, and then that search is executed really well by the scouting department. Then what they do, and this is what I talked about in the piece, what they do is they have a factory in the building. They have good assistant coaches. They obviously have a good head coach, and they're able to develop those lower round picks into either the next star players that they pay, or they develop them into guys who other teams are willing to overpay. And that's the key, because if other teams are willing to overpay them, or at least pay a lot of money for guys like Charles Omenihu, who the 49ers obviously flipped into an effective pass rusher, then the 49ers will get a compensatory pick in return. A comp pick is going to be anywhere between the 3rd and the 7th round. And then the cycle starts all over again, right? Because you get that 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round comp pick. You pick another guy because you're really good at picking in the later rounds. And then you could just do that over and over at a low cost. That's how you save enough money to be able to bring in Christian McCaffrey on a high salary, sign George Kittle to a record tight end contract, sign Nick Bosa to the highest contract of all time on the defensive side of the football, because I think that's about to come here in the next week or so. That's the 49ers formula. And as long as the scouting department is nailing these picks with the help of the coaching staff, I think they could keep on doing this indefinitely, right? And that's the magic of it. It's a very sustainable formula if you're executing it well.
No, I think it's a great point. And it also kind of goes right into the point of their window. There's a lot of people that love to be very fatalistic about their window. And because of the point you just made, I don't buy into that. I don't buy into their window closing in a year. The other thing that I think it's really one element, I read your piece, but I can't remember if this was an element of that piece that you just showed there. But I think the 49ers, Dave, are doing free agency the right way. And what I mean by that is when you go into free agency, you bring somebody from the outside world in, and you always have to overpay to attract them in free agency, right? That's same in NBA, baseball, football. That's all the same. If you want to go sign a free agent, bring them in, you got to overpay. Why? Because you're competing against the other teams. Well, we've seen many teams' chemistry just get ruined because they signed so many free agents that are very similar to the players that are incumbents. And guys start looking around the room like, hey, man, you value the same caliber of player on another team higher than you value guys that you have of that same value on this team. Where the Niners, I think, have really done something great is they've taken a very, I think, a very smart approach to free agency the last couple of years. They're not bringing in a bunch of guys. As you stated, they're piling up compensatory picks and drafting guys and signing guys after the draft, and that's the rank and file of their roster. But when they need a free agent, they go for the great player. Bring in a Javon Hargrave. Why? Because if you pay Javon Hargrave top of the shelf, you think Kalia Davis or Kevin Givens or anybody can be like, hey, man, you should pay me. No. They're not going to say that because Javon Hargrave is better than they are. And Mooney Ward is better than the Niner corners that were in the room. So nobody's begrudging Mooney Ward his. So I think it's the smartest way to go. The Niners let a lot of money walk away this year. They'll take those compensatory picks. They'll build through the draft. And then they will handpick one great player, bring him into the mix, and their chemistry never gets screwed up because you cannot deny the positive attributes of adding a truly great player to the room.
Absolutely.
And I think Lynch understands this from being a player, the dynamic of free agency and the room and how it impacts the guys who are already in that room when those free agents walk through the door. So I think the combination, I think it's sustainable. And I also think it gives them another avenue to go get great players.
It goes back to their willingness to pay people, but you pay the A-listers. So if they have to bring in the A-listers from outside, so be it, but they better be A-listers. They better be impact players. This just a week ago, this is the piece I wrote, because at this time last year, the 49ers didn't have Hargrave and they didn't have Christian McCaffrey.
Right.
And I think that those undoubtedly are two A-list players on opposite ends of the football that the 49ers have been willing to invest in, to bring in as veterans. McCaffrey via a trade, Hargrave via free agency. But you know what was interesting when I wrote this piece? This is something that Jed York actually said at the owners' meetings. This is something that Jed York understands. John Lynch went to Jed. I think Jed was at John's house before free agency this offseason. And John walked up to Jed and, wanted to kind of schmooze and be able to ask him for money. He's like, hey, I want to sign a big free agent during this cycle. And before Jed even knew who John Lynch wanted to sign, Jed said, okay, but if you're going to sign somebody, this better be a true impact player. This needs to be the best player available at the position. I don't want the third or the fourth best guy at the position, because what he understood was that you're still going to have to overpay even if it's the third or fourth best guy at the position. So if you're already overpaying, you might as well pay a little bit extra and get the cream of the crop, the very best, because the NFL is the best league in the world, right? There's no question. This is where the best football in the world is played. So everybody's good in the NFL. Essentially, everybody in the league was the first or second best player on their college team. So when you want to make an actual difference, an actual splash, especially amongst veterans, you have to have the star players. That's why the 49ers are holding on to those A-list stars. So it's very, very efficient, actually, to pay extra for the very best guy versus paying a lot, but not quite as much for the third or fourth best guy in most circumstances. So anyway, that's what Jed York essentially told John Lynch. He said, make sure that you get an impact player if you're going to spend my money. And John Lynch said, don't worry, we're already planning to sign the very top guy in the market at defensive tackle, and that was Javon Hargrave. And, I think back to pre-free agency, Larry, and I was still thinking before free agency started in outdated terms. I was thinking, maybe the 49ers will scrounge up enough pennies to sign the fourth or fifth best defensive tackle and try to marginally improve the position that was a big problem for them last year. They only had 3 sacks. Their defensive tackles combined had only 3 sacks all season. I thought, okay, maybe they might try to hodgepodge it together, play money ball. Nope. They went out and they got Javon Hargrave. And I think that shocked all of us. But now in retrospect, we understand how they're operating. And I think it makes a whole lot of sense.
And Jed, he might not have been running the show at the time, but at the beginning, at the onset of free agency, the 49ers didn't get this concept. And this was before either of us were really covering the team on a regular basis. But Nate Clements, if you're an older Niner fan, Niners paid a ton of money for Nate Clements.
Yeah.
The Niners paid a ton of money for Gabe Wilkins. The Niners paid a lot of money for Antonio Langham. I mean, these guys, and people don't even remember these guys because they're so forgettable, but those guys were good players, but they paid them like stars. And just because you pay a guy like a star doesn't make him a star. And I love the Hargrave edition because it not only was an addition, it was taking a key cog away from the Eagles. And I'll tell you, my takeaway from the NFC Championship game, I had a couple takeaways, but one of them was the 49ers need to have one more guy on their front seven, whether it be an end opposite Bosa or a tackle who commands a double team. When you have one guy on your front four that commands a double team, that's one level. But if you can get two of your front four guys who consistently command double teams, man, I mean, it really changes your dynamic on defense. And I think that's exactly what they did.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at the on-off splits from Javon Hargrave last year. He so positively impacted that Eagles defense, which had 70 sacks. They finished just short of the 84 Bears. I think 2 sacks short of that NFL record, which was 72 by the 84 Bears. Not the 85 Bears. The 85 Bears, the famous defense, I think they had 66 sacks. But the year preceding that had 72. It looked for a while like the Eagles might break it last year. And I think, there are several straws that stirred the drink, but the biggest straw might have been Javon Hargrave when you watch that tape. Yeah. His explosiveness on the inside attracted a whole hell of a lot of attention inside. And then obviously Hassan Reddick, awesome player, career year. They had Josh Sweat. I mean, those edge rushers really feasted because that inside was so sturdy and so dangerous with Javon Hargrave. And that leads me to this. This is a natural, logical extension of that thought. Nick Bosa had 18.5 sacks last year, Larry, Defensive Player of the Year, despite the fact the 49ers did nothing on the interior. Again, 3 total sacks on the interior for the 49ers. I think 2 of them came from Kevin Givens last year. 3 total sacks. So what can Bosa do now that he's going to have interior help? I think that's got to be tremendously exciting for Chris Kaserik.
Yeah, I mean, and you got to think that the shape of the pocket for Niner opponents will change dramatically because of the presence of Hargrave. Before, it was a cup, and you got Bosa and your edge coming on, and let's say Ebukam coming off the edges. Quarterbacks had the ability to step up. Now you're going to have the inverted cup, where you're going to have Armstead and Hargrave getting up the field. You're going to have the quarterback trying to sneak out the side door. And I really think Bosa and Drake Jackson, especially if Drake can play a number of snaps, could both run into double-digit sacks. Just, those guys better really find the ball and find the quarterback, because the quarterback's going to be running towards them a lot because of the presence of Hargrave. And that's going to be kind of unfamiliar territory.
Well, there's no better environment for somebody like Drake Jackson to have a breakout year. There's no better environment for somebody like Cleveland Farrell to turn his career around. I mean, we've already seen Arden Key do nothing in terms of pass rushing with the Raiders and then show up and earn a big contract while playing with the 49ers. And, I think they really like Farrell for the rigid edge that he can set against the run on base downs, but I think he might run into a couple sacks. I think Drake Jackson, again, this is runway for Drake Jackson. He's clear for takeoff now because you've got Bosa who's going to attract attention. You've got Hargrave who's going to attract attention. You've got Armstead who's going to attract attention. I don't know if Drake Jackson's going to face a single double team all year, right? So
he's going to get one-on-ones.
Exactly. So the platform for him to succeed is there, and he also has the coaching because Chris Kaserik is his position coach. And I think we could pivot right to the next thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit later was, do the 49ers potentially add an edge rusher? And, people ask me this question probably on a daily basis because they see the 49ers have a little bit of cap space and they see that guys like Yannick Ngakoue are still out there. And to that, I say, I think the 49ers are waiting and seeing because they don't want that sink to overflow, right? The more money that you spend, the tougher you're going to have keeping this team together in 2024. And I think that they realize that edge rusher opposite Bosa right now, although Drake Jackson's unproven, although Cleveland Farrell hasn't done much of anything pass rushing wise, they realize that they have built an awesome platform for somebody to emerge as a multiple sack gobbler over there, on that side. And when that's the case, you don't have to go out and spend $5 to $10 million on an edge rusher because you think that you're going to be able to get that production in-house. I think they're going to, sit back and reserve the possibility of adding somebody a little bit later on, maybe before the deadline, but you might as well exhaust the in-house options. You might as well see and make sure that your in-house guys can't do it before you go out and splurge.
Well, and let's be honest, they're going to have, as much as they may look at other guys will be looking at them. I mean, the same thing you just said about Drake Jackson, that's a reality that's well known by every free agent defensive end out there. So if you're Yannick Ngakoue and you want to have a one monster contract playing opposite Nick Bosa on a line that has Armstead and Hargrave and this wide nine philosophy and an offense that makes score 30 a game, that could be exactly what could lead you to a 12 sack season and a monster contract somewhere else in a year. So I think they may have their, the other interesting thing is there's so many edge rushers: Melvin Ingram, Jason Pierre-Paul, Ngakoue, Houston. There's half a dozen guys out there that are pretty interesting. I think they wind up with one of them, and I think they wind up with one of them at a very inexpensive price, because some defense fans are going to look at their depth chart and go, you know what, agent, I don't care what I get paid this year. Get me there, and I'll get paid next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And the longer you wait and the more hype that builds around, the defensive line, and you get closer to the regular season, the more you may have a chance to get, one of these ring chasers, right? Somebody who's just in the business of playing for a really good football team, because that can make you really rich the following season. We see this cycle play out, I think, even on a smaller scale with the 49ers, when you look at some of the players they develop and then other teams are willing to sign them. The defensive line has been a factory for that. It started, I think, with Arden Key.
Yeah.
And then it continued this past season with Sansom Ebukam, with Charles Omenihu signing bigger deals elsewhere. Jordan Willis got a little bit of money. I think he's with the Raiders this season, right?
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I mean, Chris Kasarik has a reputation, and obviously the team as a whole has a reputation. But one of my favorite things last year walking around the locker room was seeing these star players just bouncing ideas off of each other. I mean, Trent Williams holds these summits after every single game at his locker. They started organically, but it's Trent Williams and Nick Bosa pulling up a chair right by Trent Williams' locker. And then the 49ers trade for Christian McCaffrey. So he's on his way from the shower to his locker, and he decides to stop by too. So then you have, you essentially have 4 or 5 Pro Bowlers or all pros talking shop at Trent Williams' locker after games. What NFL star wouldn't want to be in that type of environment, right? Or even not even star, what B-list player wouldn't want to be in that type of environment, because that's how you get better. So that's really, I think, this goes back to when Kyle and John took over back in 2017. They made it a point. They really wanted to get the right personalities in the room, because they felt that they could build more sustainable success with the right personalities in the room. They obviously wanted good players. They weren't going to sacrifice player quality, but if all other variables are equal, if you have player A and player B and both of them are equal on the football field, but one has a better attitude and just something that will fit better in the locker room from a personality perspective, they're going to go with that guy. And I think this is how you see it paying dividends, because a team builds a reputation, a locker room builds a reputation. And if somebody now is willing to come play there at a discount, well, then all those efforts have paid for themselves.
And the Niners have shown a propensity to have a good eye for, the young emerging player that, for whatever reason, is not, coveted in his current home. I mean, you mentioned Omenihu and you mentioned Jordan Willis. If you could add a player of that ilk off a different roster for another, day 3 pick, that could be the kind of, it may not be Ngakoue. It may be somebody more like a Jordan Willis or an Omenihu. But I think you got to feel really good about their situation going into camp. And there's also a chance that some of these guys could really emerge that we're not even really talking about on this defensive line. Robert Beal Jr., Kalia Davis. I think Spencer Wagee, the kid from North Dakota State.
Yeah, Trey's teammate.
I really love what I saw from him. I mean, he had a 1.66 10-yard split. That's an identical 10-yard split to what Aldon Smith had coming out of Missouri. And Wagee really looked great to me. And the more I watch him, the more I think he could play defensive end, maybe on first and second down in the base, and not necessarily be a tackle reserve, but maybe even be in that rotation at defensive end. So I'm looking for Waggy. I'm looking for Beal. I'm looking for Kalia Davis. Always looking for Kinlaw. But they got some talented guys on their D line that could, be facing kind of make or break years.
Absolutely. And, I'm counting right now how many defensive linemen they have on the roster. Look at this: 4, 8, 10, 14. There's 16 defensive linemen
That's a
on this
ton.
roster. Yeah, that's the most they've ever had. The previous high water mark before this season was 14 on the 90-man roster. So they've carried 11 before. They've carried as few as 9 on the 53. With the practice squad rules now, it's a lot more flexible. You almost have to treat that as an extension of the 53. So, I don't know if it's going to be 10 on the 53 or 9, but maybe 2 or 3 on the practice squad with a chance to flex them up. Probably somebody like Spencer Wagey would be, in all likelihood, destined for the practice squad, but the 49ers could give him some upward mobility. He was an undrafted free agent, teammates with Trey Lance at North Dakota State. But that's a great factoid that you brought up with the 10-yard split, a 1.66. I mean, that's
at 300 pounds.
Yeah. So, I mean, they've given Chris Kacerek plenty of moldable clay. And then you just wait and see where the chips fall. I mean, guys are going to get hurt. Some guys, might be good trade bait for other teams. You never know who shows out at training camp and then commands a crazy offer from somebody else. It's like, oh, there's a 5th round pick. All right, well, we'll send him away for that 5th round pick. You just have to arm yourself with possibilities. And since the 49ers have built such a strong core, such a strong base to their roster, they're going to have a lot more fringe roster possibilities to make a profit come cut down day. And that's why it's so fun to cover all this stuff. Now, Larry, I do have to ask you, let's change gears a little bit. What is your biggest concern surrounding this team entering training camp?
I think it's the lack of quality depth at defensive end. And I'm worried about, if Drake Jackson can only play a certain number of downs, and let's say Bosa had some kind of a muscle pull and was out for 3 weeks, you could be looking at a Kerry Hyder, Austin Bryant kind of a combo. And they lost 700 snaps between Ebukam, Amenahue, and Willis. And I don't think that they replaced those guys with, like players. I think I like Farrell as a run player. I like Farrell in like a 4D end alignment as an interior player, but they really don't need him inside. They need someone who can burn the edge. I think he's pretty good against the run, but I'm concerned. He's got 10 sacks in 4 seasons. That's not very good. Kerry Hyder, I like, is kind of like the last defensive lineman on the, in the room. Very versatile, leader, great motor, but I don't like him as a regular edge rusher for sure. And then Beal couldn't get regular time at Georgia. I'm concerned whether what he's going to be able to contribute. Austin Bryant, to me, looked really skinny-legged in the OTAs, and I'm not sure what they're getting out of him. The other guys are more practice squad guys: Daryl Johnson, Alex Barrett, so it's like I'm a little concerned, to be honest, about the D-line depth. I would feel much, much better if they had a couple more pieces there that were viable, or even just a couple more prospects who were a possibility. If you had one more, if you had a Jordan Willis, if they could find another Jordan Willis, if they could find another Ebukam, I would feel a whole lot better. That to me, they're loaded at linebacker. I think they're deep at corner. I like the safeties. I like the specialists. They're deep at running back. They're deep at wide receiver. I guess a lot of people will point to right tackle, but I really like Colton McKivitz, and I'm not really that fearful of how he's going to play. My biggest concern is, the backup offensive linemen don't wind up playing very many snaps unless there's injuries, but the backup defensive linemen do play significant snaps, even if there are no injuries. And the Niners used such a rotation last year, and they kept everybody fresh. And now you're going to ask Drake Jackson to play 60 snaps a game. That might be too many. And I'm concerned about Bosa getting double teamed. If the Niners don't have a good, capable guy opposite him at defensive end. So it's the defensive end depth is my biggest concern.
This, I think, illustrates what the 49ers have to replace. First off, red is bad performance, blue is good performance. I have all the defensive tackles in the bottom half of this, starting with Eric Armstead under where my mouse is moving right now. Look how much red there was on the interior D line last year. There wasn't good performance there. So just going back to what we were talking about earlier, Javon Hargrave, that's where he fits in. This is where a potentially healthy Eric Armstead fits in. You get some dark blue in this part of it. But look at the snap counts. That's in this column right here. You mentioned Ebukam. That's 681 snaps the 49ers have to make up. Amenahu, 659 snaps they have to make up. Jordan Willis, 266 snaps. I mean, just back of my head math right there, that's something like that's over 1,500 snaps between those three players that the 49ers have to find a way to replace. And Drake Jackson had 315 last year. I know he's about 15 pounds stronger now. He's going to be in his second season. Maybe you can ask for 600 out of him, but that would be the same amount that a veteran Charles Amenahu or a veteran Samson Ebukam gave you last year. So maybe 500 is more realistic from somebody like Drake Jackson. And 500, that's only an increase of 200. You still got 1,300 snaps to go as far as replacing the production and replacing the snap load of the players before them. So it's going to be tough. I agree with you. I think that defensive end position opposite Nick Bosa, given what the 49ers have lost, maybe not necessarily in terms of high-level quality. I know that Ebukam and Amenahu were fine players. They weren't A-listers, but it's a matter of volume, right, that the 49ers have to get. And we know that volume can't be just taken for granted. You can't just throw a guy out there from the street, or you can't just throw a rookie out there and expect him to play the 600 snaps. We saw that last year with Drake Jackson. He didn't last the full season. He was inactive there at the end of the season for most of those games and all of the playoffs, right? So rookie strength is not necessarily NFL man defensive line strength, and you've got to develop these D lines. The 49ers hope that the signing with Cleveland Farrell will give them a good load of those snaps. They hope that the physical development of Drake Jackson will give him a good load of snaps. Somebody like Austin Bryant is going to be interesting, but you mentioned Robert Beal didn't play a whole lot of Georgia. Well, you can't expect him to wake up and have 400 snaps right out of bed with the 49ers. He's going to be more of a specialist, right? He's going to be somebody that they look at as a speed rusher when the time is right on some of these passing downs. So despite all the bodies they have in that D-line room, I think that Chris Kasarik is going to have to play some Tetris to make sure that he gets it right at that DN spot opposite Nick Bosa.
And I would look for them to, be active as far as looking for other people. The one thing is they don't have real money committed to any of those guys. I mean, Bosa's going to get paid record-setting money. But, I'm kind of hoping that the Bosa, the contract extension of Bosa is also a combination of, hey, Nick signed, and with that cap savings, we also signed this defensive end. I'd feel a whole lot better if they had two more defensive ends. Or if Robert Beal looked just like a house on fire, or Spencer Wagee shows up and he is exactly what I think he is, which is, a high motor guy who's ready to contribute right away, despite the fact he went undrafted. If Beal or Wagee surprise them, maybe, but I'm very concerned because even if Drake gives you an unbelievable second year, you're still, you play these guys in a rotation, and the Niners love to bring in, reinforcements and keep everybody's, play speed really, really high based on, hey, you're not going to play 65 snaps. You're going to play 20 snaps or 30 snaps. And we want you to just play like a bat out of hell for 30 snaps. That to me is the major concern, because the rest of this team, they're pretty, this is one of the deeper football teams in the league.
It's the deepest, I think.
Yeah.
And top to bottom.
They've got a lot of good players. They got, if McCaffrey goes down, they're fortified. If Debo goes down, I think they could get by. But if Bosa goes down, it could be a disaster.
Well, Again, of course. Nick, we saw what happened in 2020. The 49ers took a big tumble when Nick Bosa went down. You don't want Trent Williams to go. You never want a star player to go down, but those guys, Williams and Bosa, are the foundational cornerstones of the team. So you're going to pay him record money, and you paid Trent Williams record money because he's that important. I do think that we can go back to one of our initial points, though, and assuming that Nick Bosa does stay healthy, because that's mandatory. Between him and Hargrave and Armstead, what they're setting up, that platform for the defensive end position that we're talking about, that's going to be a platform to succeed. So there are a lot of questions, but boy, if you can't succeed when you're playing next to Nick Bosa, Javon Hargrave, and Eric Armstead, then I don't know where you can succeed in the league, right? So the 49ers are relying on the rising tide to lift all the boats. And that's probably the financially sustainable way to do things, because again, they're going to have 280 million at least 280 million in liabilities for the 2024 season, with a cap of probably no more than 240 million by the time that Nick Bosa puts pen to paper with this new contract. So in 2024, it's getting really crowded. 49ers have to keep that in mind as they build this roster. I'll tell you what, as far as concerns go, you mentioned offensive line a little bit. I think that we opened the show talking about all the 49ers quarterback injuries. People always like to tie that to the offensive line, sometimes for good reason, sometimes not for really good reason. I think that I showed that absurdly long list of QB injuries. Let me see if here it is. I could find it again, put it on the screen. I think in general, early on, like through the first half of the Shanahan Lynch tenure, these are 49ers QB injuries since 2017. Early on, a lot of these were blamable on the offensive line. The line was bad in pass protection early in this regime. It's been a lot better over the course of the past 2 years, to the point where you look at, if you want to individually go through the QB injuries from 2022, there's not a lot of, oh my God, this was because of a massive breakdown in protection. That's why this quarterback got hurt. They actually had various reasons for each one of them that were outside of that purview. So anyway, I think the 49ers are seeing a return on investment in what they've poured into the offensive line. That's not to say that it can't get better moving forward. And I think one of the moves that they did to try to improve the pass protection even further was replacing Mike McGlinchey. He was a better run blocker than pass blocker. They weren't willing to pay big money to McGlinchey because they thought that Colton McKivitz might be a better pass protector at right tackle. But the stride that they make at that position, if McKivitz can indeed make the pass protection better at right tackle, and the strides that Spencer Burford will potentially make at right guard, because he was a below average right guard last year with potential. I think that he's got a high ceiling. If he can make that step this year into an above average right guard, especially in terms of pass protection, I think left tackle to right tackle, you're going to be looking at potentially the best pass protecting offensive line of the Shanahan Lynch regime. And that is not something that should be downplayed. That's what the 49ers are shooting for. And I think that maybe as correlated with their Super Bowl chances as anything else that we're talking about right now.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good call. I like, a couple years ago, the 49ers were very thin, and the quality of their depth was very questionable, and they were just crossing their fingers, really. Mm-hmm. Now look at it. John Feliciano, I thought, was a terrific signing. He's a big-bodied veteran guy who can play both guard spots or center. And he could really, if Brendel had an injury, man, I don't think you lose a whole lot going to Feliciano. I thought that was a terrific pickup. And then, I'm sure you took notice when John Lynch said that Nick Zakelj was having the best offseason of almost any 49er. And Zakelj, outside of being Brock Purdy's roommate, I know that's what people know him for this last year. But man,
card.
as a personnel guy, man, I love the potential of Nick Zakelj. You talk about 6'6", long arms, 315 pounds. He's smart. He's tough. I wonder if in a pinch he could play a little right tackle. But I'm eager to see Zakelj. I think Zakelj is the kind of guy that could be an NFL starter at some point. So you got Zakelj, you got Feliciano. They brought in Matt Pryor. They have Jalen Moore. You still have Jason Poe. They really like Joey Fisher. Asked Forrester, is Fisher a tackle or a guard? He said, no, he's a guard. So I'll tell you the other guy that really opened my eyes, and now he's a little undersized, but he played left tackle at University of Hawaii, is Ilm Manning.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, Ilm Manning really looks great as far as, he's 6'4", 295, so he's a little undersized. But, man, this is a terrific athlete, and I think he's got an NFL future for sure. So I loved what I saw from Ilm Manning in the practices. So they are a little thin at tackle. They're fortified in the interior. Banks, Brendel, Burford, I think are real solid. And then if you want to say the twos interior would be, Feliciano and Zakel and Poe or Joey Fisher or Ilm Manning. I like all those guys. I think they're all good prospects. I'm a little, if McKivitz can't do it, is Jalen Moore, is he progressing? Is Matt Pryor going to come to camp in shape? Is Leroy Watson? Is he, I kind of thought Watson looked better than he did a year ago, but he was a practice squad guy. Is that asking too much? I kind of wonder what their contingency plans are at tackle if McKivitz, for whatever reason, got hurt or struggled. What would plan B be at right tackle?
Well, Leroy Watson is the biggest wild card of all because he was a tight end, teammates with Burford at San Antonio just a couple years ago. So he was a rookie last year and he wasn't even 300 pounds yet. So they just stashed him on the practice squad and told him to add weight. He came back this offseason program and he'd, done his homework assignment. He came back over 300 pounds. He looked nice and strong. So he's finally playing at a tackle's weight. Now, how raw is he? We'll have an indication, I think, during training camp when the pads come on. Is that still going to be something where he has to get used to that new weight and he's going to be a 2-year developmental guy? Maybe you start talking about Leroy Watson being an actual legitimate, contender to play in 2024, or is he going to be able to help in 2023? That's a big question. Jalen Moore is probably the most developed, polished of those options, right? That's I know I'm talking about guys that are on the bubble. I think Pryor will make the team just because they're going to want a veteran back there, but maybe Moore impresses so much and has a surge here in his 4th year with the 49ers that they decide that he, okay, Matt Pryor, you're not on the team. Jalen Moore, this is going to be your spot. He's going to have to earn it, though, because Jalen Moore, at one point, he was ahead of Colton McKivitz on the pecking order, right? 2021.
Didn't he play, was it left tackle the entire preseason a couple years ago?
Yes, and that was 21. That wasn't 20. So this is only more.
He looked good.
I misspoke. Yeah. And he looked good. Something happened, though, where when Colton McKivitz got cut, and that was at the start of the 21 season, McKivitz came back with a vengeance, and by the end of that 21 season, McKivitz had leapfrogged Moore on the depth chart. There was a game against Jacksonville that year. The 49ers blew out Urban Meyer and Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville, where Jimmy Garoppolo threw a touchdown pass in the first half of a game where I believe it was Jalen Moore starting at right tackle in that game. I think that, it was after McGlinchey got hurt. The week after McGlinchey got hurt, or 2 weeks after. And Moore just got roasted by the edge rusher. I forgot who it was. Garoppolo got drilled, but I think he found Ayuk for the touchdown. And from that play forward, I don't think the 49ers had all too much confidence in Jalen Moore. I think they replaced him with Tom Compton, actually, at that point at right tackle, and it was Tom Compton the rest of the way. So ever since then, Moore is a guy we just don't talk about because, we figured, okay, 49ers lost faith in him. He's probably going to be on his way out when his contract expires kind of guy. He better hang on for a roster spot. But I would caution that we also had written off Colton McKivitz at a certain point because he looked terrible earlier in his career. 49ers cut him after training camp in 2021 because they weren't happy, and he came back with a vengeance, and now they're talking about him being essentially a lock at right tackle. So it's not impossible for players to rebound after their stock is low, especially in this offensive line room. So I would think, and I'll put this depth chart back up on the screen. I have Matt Pryor making the team. I know you're not as high on Matt Pryor as I am. I'm not necessarily high on Matt Pryor.
I didn't think he was. I mean, he's huge, right? He's 6'7", 330. But to me, he just looked like he was carrying some bad weight in the offseason. And we'll see. I mean, he's got the pedigree as far as experience wise to land that job. But
I
man,
guess I'm looking at pedigree. What 26 starts in his career? I just
right.
think the 49ers would want some experience to be able to man swing tackle when you have so little of it at the starting position. But again, if Jalen Moore puts on a surge like Colton McKivitz has over the past couple of years, he can take that spot right away from Matt Pryor. And as you can see here, I have 8 offensive linemen making the team. It's hard to justify carrying 9 when you're so crowded elsewhere. But the 49ers might carry 9 because of this experience issue. They might say, hey, Jalen Moore's playing well. He's impressed us. He earns a spot. And Matt Pryor, he has 20-plus career starts. We need that experience on the 53. He's going to have a spot because of that. So maybe they carry 9. But as you can see, there's a bit of a logjam at guard because of that. Because, you have to carry tackles just for the sake of carrying tackles, because your season could go off the rails really quickly if tackles get hurt and there's nobody behind them. But then there's no room to carry somebody like Joey Fisher, somebody like Ilm Manning, or somebody like Jason Poe, a fan favorite. So it's going to be really interesting how they balance the practice squad with the 53-man roster in the case of the offensive line.
When the one guy that's still out there that I would be very interested in seeing them sign is Tom Compton. This team got to the NFC Championship game with Compton at right tackle, and I realized Compton, had a rough game against the Rams in his final game with the 49ers. But, I mean, it's so hard to find tackles. You don't know what you have in Pryor. You don't know necessarily what you have in Jalen Moore. I'd feel a lot better if they had one more guy who they felt like could play a backup tackle spot. I think 9 probably makes sense. I think the starting 5 I would have, and then Jalen Moore, Nick Zakelj, John Feliciano, and probably Joey Fisher. But who knows? I mean, they may go with Pryor and Zakelj and Moore and Feliciano and go with 4 that way. But I think 9 is probably the way they go. But you never know. If the one thing about McKivitz is if you talk to like a Trent Williams is like, hey man, I'm impressed by McKivitz. Nothing, no moment's too big. No, he doesn't get too high, too low. He's got a real even, disposition as a player. I've talked to him many times. I'm sure you have as well. This guy is not like, I got Aaron Donald this week. He's not like that. He's just like a good old boy from West Virginia who's tough as nails and doesn't sweat it. And his pulse doesn't get too high. He doesn't get too low. I think he's, I actually think, Dave, that there's a chance that McKivitz is better than McGlinchey across the board because it's a passing league, and McGlinchey struggled so much to get outside against the greatest speed rushers that he would lunge and then he would get off balance, and then guys would bang his left shoulder and he would literally go flying. I think McKivitz has an ability to kick out against the speed rushers at a better, and maintain that balance. And I think he's going to be a better pass protector. I really do.
At $1.5 million this year, that's his cap hit this year. He was going to be a restricted free agent. They bypassed that whole process, signed him to a cheap 2-year deal. I think, Trent Williams is going to be 35 years old. So the 49ers have to start thinking about the future at both tackle spots, just in case he doesn't play much longer. I'm not saying that a retirement's imminent. He's been the best tackle in football for 3 straight years, coming off of the cancer removed from his head, right? What a comeback story from Trent Williams. But you still have to be thinking about the long term. 49ers will have a first-round pick again for the first time since 2021 in the 2024 draft. And you probably use that on tackle. You're not committed to McKivitz in the long term. He's a bridge tackle. So you could think, okay, you get a stud in the 2024 draft. He can play right tackle if McKivitz is only with the team for a year or 2. And then whoever that right tackle that you draft is, or that tackle that you draft is, can move over to the left side and take over for Trent Williams whenever the day comes that Trent decides to hang him up. Again, there's no indication that's going to be anytime soon because he's still playing the best football of his career at age 35. But every smart franchise arms itself with options at really important positions. So, and, back to McKivitz, I think he really grew up in week 18 of the 2021 season against the Rams. Trent wasn't able to go. They tossed McKivitz in there. And I don't think that it was an easy game for him. He gave up 5 or 6 pressures. The 49ers had to gut that win out. I mean, it was as epic as it gets, right? Must-win game. Didn't start well. They were down, 17-0 early. The right side of the line was giving up a whole lot of pressure as well. So McKivitz on the left side was struggling. Compton was struggling on the right. But somehow, some way, they pulled it out. And because it was a win, I think that really propelled Colton McKivitz into the next season. So much so, there was such a level of gutsiness in that game that Trent Williams will tell you now that he ended up suiting up on a high ankle sprain that he suffered in the divisional playoffs. He ended up suiting up at the NFC Championship game. Trent Williams will tell you now that he regrets suiting up and playing that hurt in the NFC Championship game. He thinks he tried to be a little too much of a hero, and he thinks that if he would have let Colton McKivitz do that job, 49ers might have won that game. I know that probably hurts 49ers fans to hear, but when you talk to Trent, he legitimately believes that, and I think that's a really high compliment for Colton McKivitz.
Yeah, and it really speaks to the good feeling that Trent has about McKivitz, but it also speaks to the humility of Trent Williams. You're talking about a Hall of Famer who can say to himself honestly, hey, you know what? I wasn't near 100%, and I think McKivitz at 100% is better than me at fill in your percentage. And I thought that was a very interesting line from him. I'll say this one factor at tackle, and tackle is maybe one of the, you just said it. I mean, the Niners haven't had a number 1 pick, so it's like, that's where tackles reside. You don't get tackles typically outside of the first 25 picks in the draft. But one team to keep your eye on in this summer as the cut down comes about is the Cincinnati Bengals, because they signed big Orlando Brown, Zeus Brown, away from Kansas City. He's going to man their left tackle spot. They're going to move Jonah Williams, the first-round pick in 2019, the Alabama kid, from left tackle to right tackle. Jonah doesn't want to move, but he's going to move. And they have Lael Collins, the former Dallas Cowboy, on that team. They also have Jackson Carman. They also have a young player named Deontay Smith out of East Carolina, who's a tremendous prospect, who was a 4th-round pick in 2021. And I don't think all of those guys are going to wind up making the team. And there's already been some speculation that Lael Collins or Smith may wind up cut or traded at some point this summer. And I could see the 49ers knocking on the door for Lael Collins. Collins is only 30. I don't want to say it'll be a similar move to their move to get Tomlinson, Laken Tomlinson. But, Lael Collins, I think at right tackle, 6'4", about 320 pounds. He's got experience. He's not slated to start. He's got a pretty high cap figure. They have some young players there that they probably are going to go with as backups. Just look at Cincinnati as they cut things down. They may have an extra tackle, and I could see the 49ers being a good trade partner for them.
So it's interesting because you're talking about the 49ers as a potential trade buyer at the cut down. Earlier, we were talking about them being potential sellers. And
could be a little bit of both,
sell, give arms you more to buy, right? Because you're theoretically, you want to keep some balance on the spreadsheet there. If you're going to be giving away draft picks or whatever, you want to make sure that some are coming in. So there is potential for some movement this year, just because it is really crowded along the edges of the 49ers roster. And then they also do have a couple positions, I think the edges of both lines, essentially, right? The defensive end spot and then tackle, the edges of both lines do have some depth concerns for the 49ers. So it will be fascinating. Well, Larry, we've been going for a while here. I want to toss up one more piece, the one that I wrote today, just because you mentioned him at the very start. I was over at this guy's camp because he's from out here. He's from near the Nashville area. Juwan Jennings. I was at his football camp on Sunday and got to talk to him. Juwan Jennings is a really interesting case when we talk about the construction of the 49ers roster, because he's a bargain this year. $940,000 this year for a good number 3 wideout guy, who, you look at how he gets under opponent's skin when he blocks. He's converted 31 first downs over the course of his time with the 49ers. That's just 2 seasons. I mean, the third and Juwan nickname is very, very deserved. So obviously at $940,000, the 49ers are loving this deal, but other teams are going to be loving Juwan Jennings if he continues producing like this, and he's going to be a restricted free agent after this season. You mentioned him as somebody who might not be with the team past 2023 due to financial reasons because he might get paid. But anyway, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Juwan Jennings just because I think he is the perfect intersection of discussion between what the 49ers can do in 2023 and what they have to keep in mind financially for 2024 and beyond.
Well, you're there in Nashville, and Juwan Jennings is a big deal in the state of Tennessee.
Yeah,
he was a great player for the Vols, and he's got a huge fan base there. And who else is there? Rand Carthon, and Rand knows firsthand how valuable Juwan Jennings can be to a young quarterback. And what do they have in Tennessee? Well, they got Tannehill, but they also have Malik Willis and Will Levis. And look at that receiving core. Now, they just signed DeAndre Hopkins, and they have Treylon Burks. A lot of people expect Burks to really take off. But most teams in the NFL use, a lot of three wides. And if you look at the backups on that Tennessee wide receiver core, I mean, there's not a good player in the bunch. I mean, seriously, you're just talking about guys. You're talking about just like the witness protection program. I mean, nobody knows any of these guys. Chris Moore, Racy McMath, Kyle Phillips, Mason Kinsey, Colton.
Where are you reading
Dow.
these names from?
I'm looking at Tennessee's depth chart right here. I kind of like Jacob Copeland from Maryland, but I mean, they're thin.
David Lombardi, wide receiver for the Titans.
Larry Krueger. I mean, these guys can't play a lick. No, but I'm just saying it could get down to the cut down. And if Tay Martin, who I thought looked really good catching passes at TCU the other day from Trey Lance, and Tay Martin, I think I expect Tay to bust out. He's a good player. Now, he doesn't have great speed, but he's got awesome hands. And he's got maybe, he could be a red zone threat, kind of like Juwan. And then there's Ronnie Bell. And if there's one guy that kind of, man, I really didn't like the pick and didn't understand it on draft day, but then watched the minicamp and thought, oh my God, this guy is a player, it's Ronnie Bell. And the more I read about him, Dave, Ronnie Bell's dad is a college football wide receiver coach. And that speaks so much to the point of why this kid looks so developed. He has the nuances of that position down at a level that very, very few rookies do. And we were standing side by side when he made 4 or 5 big-time catches in traffic in the mini camps and OTAs, looking very much like a veteran possession guy. I look at the Niners as a 5-receiver team. Ayuk and Debo, Danny Gray for his ability to run off the coverage, Ray McLeod for his return ability. But then I think it's a competition between Juwan, Chris Conley, Tay Martin, Ronnie Bell, maybe Isaiah Winstead, maybe Willie Snead for that last spot. I don't see them taking 6. I think it's going to be 5. So Debo and Ayuk and Gray and Ray, okay, there's 4. But if Ronnie Bell looks really good, or if Tay Martin looks really good, I could see, and they don't necessarily have to be better than Juwan. If they're similar to Juwan, I could see the 49ers calling up Rand Carthon and saying, hey, how about you make a move, give us a 5th-round pick or a 6th-round pick, and we'll give you a player that will make you very, very popular inside the state of Tennessee. And Jennings would be they need Jennings more in Tennessee than the Niners need him. I know he's a favorite. I know he's made big catches. I know it's unpopular to even think about moving Juwan because everybody loves him. And I know a lot of people have him penciled in as the 3rd receiver, but I don't think Danny Gray is going anywhere for his vertical ability. Ray gives you an awful lot as a runner, as a running back, as a return man. And I think Ronnie Bell, Tay Martin could give Juwan a real run for his spot. And I would not be surprised if he wound up in Tennessee.
See, I disagree because I think the 49ers value Jennings blocking and Jennings separating ability on short routes more than they value Danny Gray's pure speed. And I could be wrong, but based on what I've seen the 49ers running offensively over the entire Shanahan era, I think Danny Gray is much more expendable to them than Juwan Jennings, even though Gray has longer on his rookie contract. If you look at my roster, I have both of them making the team. But I think you have a really strong point saying that this might just be a 5 wideout team. It's the case that we need at every position. We need to look very long and hard at every position and say, hey, maybe they take one fewer guy because this roster is so deep, so they can take a good football player on the 53-man roster elsewhere. So if you do have to cut one of the players from this group of 6 from the receiver room that I have up here, obviously Ayuk and Debo are on the team. I think Ray McLeod is a valuable weapon because Debo can get hurt, and you need the special teams aspect of Ray McLeod. He's a trusted returner, and he can also be that Swiss Army knife behind Debo Samuel. Then, I think we're in agreement that Ronnie Bell is really impressive, that he's got a good shot to make this team. What I think that we're in disagreement is how the 49ers might value Danny Gray against Juwan Jennings. And
I had a conversation once with not to interrupt, but I had a conversation once with Kyle Shanahan about play calling. And I said, how vital do you view the complementary piece that takes the top off the defense? And he's like, oh, it means a lot. It just means a lot. I just think that the addition of Braden Willis gives them a Juwan Jennings type trusted middle of the receiver. That's the other thing. I saw your list there. I'm not sure about Charlie Warner making the team. I think they may go 3 tight ends and go with the 2 rookies behind Kittle. The stat that jumped out to me that I could not believe, Dave, was that Niner tight ends not named George Kittle last year had 7 catches all year.
That I just looked that up the other day. It's insane, right? They got nothing out of tight end 2. So if they get something out of tight end 2, you're right. That's a game changer. And we can't look at receivers in a vacuum and tight ends in a vacuum. We have to look at them collectively.
Yeah.
Because that's how Shanahan runs an offense, right? George Kittle will line up out wide or in the slot. The tight ends, you could line up all over the formation if Shanahan likes them. He hasn't had a strong number 2 to be able to have that kind of versatility. But you look at the wideouts lining up everywhere with Debo in the backfield. Christian McCaffrey can go out in the slot. Juszczyk has been out wide for about 10 snaps this season. I mean, it's a Kyle Shanahan special to be interchangeable on offense. So I think that it's a really, really strong observation from you to talk about Braden Willis as somebody who can upset the dynamics of the receiving room, right? Maybe you
got one more here. I didn't even think about your guy here. How about them Niners? That's a great comment. He said, David and Larry, don't forget Conley has graded over 80.0 in run blocking the past 4 years. He's among the best blocking wide receivers in the league, and he's a vertical threat.
Yeah.
I don't know that he's the vertical threat that he was coming out of Georgia, but I didn't know that stat about the blocking. And you know how important Shanahan views wide receiver blocking in his run game. That's an interesting that makes me pause right there, just seeing that stat.
Yeah, no, it's big. And one thing about Juwan Jennings, we know that he's a good blocker. He does that. One thing that really, stood out to me when I'm writing this article on Juwan, I thought of it. It was some recall to what Kyle Shanahan said last year. Shanahan said that Jennings is the 49ers' best separator, which I don't know if you remember this press conference, but it made some of our jaws drop. I mean, this is a team that features Brandon Ayuk, who, he's putting cornerbacks in a blender. That those are TikTok highlight reels when watching Brandon Ayuk cut near the end zone, making guys fall over. So Shanahan, I think, really believes in Jennings' separating ability and in his run blocking. You look at a comment like this, he obviously at least thinks highly of Chris Conley's run blocking potential in the 49ers system. And we know that Chris Conley can burn a 40-yard dash, which would translate to Kyle Shanahan's desire for somebody who can knock the top off a defense and create some space. I think it all comes back to this, Larry. I think it all comes back to Kyle Shanahan arming himself with as many options as possible. We talked about it at the quarterback position, how we talked about it at linebacker. We talked about it at kicker. I think he's done it at wide receiver too. So we can finish up on that note. It's going to be a fun camp to see how this all shakes out because there are intriguing options that will not make the team just by the nature of math, right? They have got 53 spots. Who's going to make the team on a really crowded roster?
Yeah, and my belief that Gray's going to make it, maybe if Conley is that good of a run blocker, maybe he could be the vertical threat, run off the top of the defense, and give you that, at least that field stretching capability, that space creator, and be a blocker. He could be an alternative to Danny Gray, who was still, and I love Danny Gray, and I did a number of interviews with him last year, and he's telling me, oh man, once you got to see my touchdown dance. I'm like, I got to see it. We all got to see it. But I think he was still, year 2 in the OTAs, still asking a lot of questions of other receivers about where he should be and that kind of thing. He seemed a little like he needs to spend some time in his playbook. So maybe, and Conley was a late ad. So maybe they saw that Gray is not progressing quite as fast as they want. And maybe Conley's there to give Gray a little bit of a kick in the butt. I don't know, but I will say this, the Harbaugh line of iron sharpens iron. The Niners have great competition in several spots. And I think this live stream has kind of highlighted that fact.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always fun to look at that depth chart and be like, man, this is a hard puzzle to solve. So anyway, everybody, if you're watching this, I'm going to toss the link to this article in the description on Jawan Jennings. So be sure to go check that out. And Larry, I'm told that you hit 20,000 subscribers today. So I wanted to say congratulations. You were getting started not that long ago. So congratulations to you. You're doing some cool work out there, and 20K, that's a big milestone.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you. And yeah, I mean, it's been a fun year. It's kind of old media, radio, kind of going into new media, YouTube, and I'm really glad that I got in this arena. I love doing these kinds of things, being able to control who I'm on with, when I'm on, what I'm talking about. Loving covering the 49ers and loving the audience. And I don't know if you take calls and that kind of thing, but I've done a little bit of that, a little bit of guest interviews, some post game. And I really love being in the YouTube space. So, yeah, thank you. I'm sure we've got probably one of those things that shows up. It's like it shows up to me like, hey, people who, follow your channel also follow Dave's channel. So I know there's some crossover here, but I just want to thank the people who are in your chat who do follow my channel. Thank you for the support, man, because I didn't think I could get here 20,000 in a little bit over a year, but it's happened. And I look forward to year 2. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun, and it's fun to do a crossover like this. It's social media, so in our profession, it's required because we rely on the viewers, and in my case, the readers. I'm writing a lot for The Athletic to actually consume the material, and Twitter became the first big tool for writers. And now I see YouTube as a way to further just get some of my work out there and then talk football with somebody as knowledgeable as you. You have a scouting background, so you know what you're talking about. And it's always a lot of fun to chop it up. So thanks for giving me a lot of your time. And anytime you need me to hop onto your channel again, be happy to do it. I think we've got a lot to talk about this year.
Oh, I mean, it's going to be, I can't wait for camp because it's just going to be so juicy. And it's going to be like a day-to-day. And, there's like the Giants fans and then maybe the Warriors fans, but then the Niner audience is just so vast and so big that literally sometimes I wonder, why does anybody talk about anything but the 49ers in this market? Because the Niner audience is so huge and they want their information, and there's so many knowledgeable fans who are dialed in, and that's just perfect for guys like us. So thank you to everybody who supported the channel, and Dave, keep rolling with your channel. You're well over 20,000 and doing great and kicking ass. So keep it rolling, man. All right, it seems like just yesterday we were doing Stanford pregame on KMBR 1050.
Yeah, except just yesterday means 10 years ago. That's how quickly time flies. What are we at? Stanford had a good year in 2013. I think they should have won the national title. They blew a game at Utah, then they blew a game at USC that year, but that might have been their best team that they had, and that was 10 years ago that we were doing the pregame shows on KMBR for Stanford. Kevin Hogan was the quarterback.
That was multiple girlfriends ago for you.
Yeah.
Now you're a married man. And then the other thing was, I think you were writing for the Bootleg. Is that what it was called?
I was still with the Bootleg, which was part of scout.com. I didn't get hired by ESPN until 2014. So that was the OG, the Bootleg, back in 2013.
Now that we're this far removed, I can admit I needed you badly to get through some of those pregame shows, because I'll tell you, you think you know a topic, and then all of a sudden, hey, you've got 2 hours, you're standing in a field, go talk Stanford football. I mean, you and I could talk Niners just off the top of our head. We don't need notes. We don't need anything. But, man, I can't talk 2 hours by myself about Stanford football. And you were encyclopedic in your knowledge of Stanford football back then. And to me, it was a lifesaver, but it also was provided really great content for the Stanford fans going to the game because, man, you knew Stanford football like the back of your hand. And I just want to thank you for several incredible shows back then.
Well, yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for having me on. It really helped kind of get my career going there on air, doing some of that stuff. It's all the reps that you get are good practice. And
yeah,
I'm really happy that I've been able to, that portion of my brain. I don't know Stanford football as well as I did back then because I've now dedicated that portion of my brain to the 49ers. There's only so much room that you have. You can only know the 90th man of the roster for one team unless you're a supercomputer, and I'm not. So,
but you would talk to Dave Shaw and you would go to the pressers and you would have anecdotes about all kinds of guys and knowledge of their recruiting and, how they were going about things. And what I appreciated back then and what I knew, that's when I knew you were going places, is that you were a young guy, but you were very critical of Stanford. It wasn't like you were just like, hey, Stanford, you know what? You weren't just clapping for them. You were critical of them, and you to the point where Dave Shaw was annoyed by you. If I remember right, there were several pressers where like Dave was like, "Hey, you're pressing me a little hard here," and that's when I kind of knew that okay, this guy's got a future, man. Because he, that was ballsy of you because you were covering. People don't realize you cover a team like that. It's hard to get access. It's hard to be critical, but you found a way to balance good coverage and criticism. And it's a testament to you.
Well, and I think both of us are doing that now with the 49ers. I think it's really important to be level-headed. And when you do deliver criticism, and we both deliver plenty of it, it's got to be statistically backed. It's got to be factually backed. And, you just don't take pot shots because you have to go into that locker room after. And, these are a bunch of men and they're working hard. And I think everybody that has worked as hard as they have to reach the NFL understands if there is warranted criticism. Absolutely understands. I've talked to several guys in the 49ers locker room who I've been critical of, and they haven't lost any respect for me. They understand what the job is. It just has to be warranted. And I think that, back in the Stanford days, I was still figuring out, exactly what is crossing the line, what is warranted, what's not. And there were a few press conferences there where the head coach was very happy with you. And those aren't big pressers either. Those aren't, the Niners pressers with 40 people in there where you're kind of faceless. You might be one of 3 or one of 4. So if the head coach is unhappy with what you tweeted, he's going to let you know that he's unhappy with what you tweeted back then. And I think it's part of the territory though. And I think that keeping it even keeled will always lead you to the truth, will always lead you to a good place because you figure out, who does need to get better and where does the team need to get praised. And right now, in terms of the 49ers, they deserve a whole lot of praise because they have built a really strong roster. They were, what was their record? 2-14 before this regime took over. They started 0-8 or 0-9. I don't even know what it was. I covered a whole lot of losses in 2017, my first year with the 49ers. So they brought it to a place where they have a Pro Bowl team walking around their locker room. Yeah, they haven't won a Super Bowl yet, but you give yourself the best shot possible to win a Super Bowl every year. And then some of it's just going to be luck, right? So I think sooner rather than later, the math says the 49ers will get one of these, and we'll see if that's this year. But we're kind of in a golden age of covering the 49ers right now just because of how much material there is to talk about.
I'll tell you the conversation that I really enjoyed last year in the locker room, and this is when I really knew how big time some of these 49er players are. After Ray McLeod fumbled, was that the Seattle game or the Dallas game? Maybe
I think the Dallas in the playoffs. He fumbled against Dallas in the playoffs.
Okay, so and I had a real good rapport with Ray, and I talked to him a number of times. And I walked up to him in the locker room the next week, and I said, Ray, can we talk a little bit about your fumble? And God, come on. Do guys really want to talk about their fumble? No, they don't want to talk about their fumble. And he was like, yeah, let's talk about it. And so I wanted to get like in real time because his next touch, if you remember, I think went for like 53 yards on
I remember that.
And it was like about a 15-minute period. And I said, Ray, you didn't fumble all year, and here's a big playoff game, and you fumbled. One, what's going through your mind after you fumble? And what was that 15 minutes like before you got your next hand on the ball? And what were you saying to yourself as you're watching? because it was your next play, but you had to wait like 15 minutes of real time. And he gave me such an insightful, real, hey, man, I couldn't believe I fumbled there. And I was so mad at myself. And I was so determined that I was going to make up for that. And I just kept telling myself, don't let that play define you. Don't let that play define you. And 15 minutes later, I got my hands on the ball and I made the first guy miss. And then I saw, green grass and I hit the hole. And it was very like firsthand, but also very human, very real. And I thought to myself, man, this is why these guys are so good, because they can face up criticism, but I didn't necessarily be like, you fumbled. It was like, let's just intellectual. And of course they won the game, so that helps. But, the fact of the matter is it was an uncomfortable conversation to a degree, but it turned into one of the best interviews I did all year. And a lot of it's because players at this level can understand criticism, and as long as it doesn't seem personal, they can roll with it.
Yeah, absolutely. You had to overcome a lot of doubters to reach the NFL, right? So there was a lot of criticism, a lot of negativity along the way. It is the best of the best, and you're also being fairly compensated once you reach this level too. So some of that criticism definitely is part of the game. I think that's a great anecdote to illustrate what was going on. I still remember when he muffed that punt.
Yeah.
It was a precarious game because nobody was really doing much offensively. So it could have reminded you a little bit of Kyle Williams back in the 2011 season, right? When the 49ers were in a defensive tug of war, kind of an arm wrestling match with the New York Giants. And then it was those fumbles that tipped the scale to the visiting team. But 49ers got through it. Brock Purdy made some throws. George Kittle made that crazy catch that took, I think it was like a 12-yard catch. I think from the moment that he first touched the ball to the moment that he secured it, he covered 12 yards of field. I literally put on the replay and watched in slow motion because that was the headline of my story. It was inside the 12-yard catch, and he held on. Great hand-eye coordination. That helped the 49ers seal that game. I think that was where Christian McCaffrey scored the touchdown and then gave the ball, or George Kittle gave the ball to Jerry Rice, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So a lot of cool stuff happening right now in the 49ers building. You've got the past and the present connecting. I think Steve Young might be around a lot more this year because he's not with ESPN anymore. And I think he's going to be coaching the Menlo girls flag football team, right? So
I saw that. I mean, ESPN, shame on ESPN. I mean, you kept all kinds of donkeys and you got rid of Steve Young. Steve is, I think, one of the best. And he came on my channel earlier this year right during the playoffs. And I did a live stream with him, and people on the YouTube could not believe that it was like Steve Young, it was like, and I told Steve, I go, Steve, I won't use you too much, but I do appreciate you coming on. And that helped grow the channel quite a bit around playoff time. But it's things like that where you can bring the YouTube fan from like face to face with a Steve Young, or face to face with a guy like yourself, or somebody who's covering the team. And that's so much greater than we ever could do on the radio. And that's why I'm so excited about this medium, because you can bring the fans through their phone, face to face with people that are giving them content that's really, really top notch. So anyway, I just a little thought on the whole medium, but yeah, Steve's a class act, and ESPN. What are you thinking?
Yeah, they laid me off too, but it led to where I am now.
Seriously, and they probably did you a favor.
Hey, best thing that ever happened to me, because that was in 2017, and I got to become part of the Athletic while it was growing. I started covering the 49ers in training camp when Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch were new in 2017. There's nothing better than getting in on the ground floor of a rising stock, right? The 49ers have been a rising stock, and I'm just so grateful I've been able to cover the rise, because it adds so much texture to the story when you say they were 0-8 to begin the 2017 season. And then they took another step back when Jimmy Garoppolo got hurt in week 3 of the 2018 season. So it's never linear, but I'll tell you what, the locker room and the press conference room got a whole lot more crowded with media in 2019. And I'm proud to say that I was still there when there's only 4 of us at practice, in 2017. And it's cool to see that upward trajectory, because then you could tell the full story of how this regime has developed this program.
And you guys are doing a great job at the Athletic. Yourself, Matt Barrows is one of my favorites. My old producer and good friend, Tanika Smothers, I know is a big part of what you guys do. And Kawakami. And I always say to Tim when I see him, I go, "You got 2 of the best guys, Tim." He's like, "I know." And then he'll rip you guys just jokingly. But, but I don't want him to get big heads. But, yeah, keep it up, man. You and Matt do a real nice job. And I always say when I have either of you guys on, go spend the money on the Athletic, because they're Niner, the guys that they have covering the Niners. And also, I'm a huge fan of Dane Brugler. I'm a big draft guy. Between Brugler, yourself, and Barrows, there's a lot of good content there.
I really, really appreciate the shout. If you do want to go join the Athletic, here's my home landing page. I'll put the latest article, the Jawan Jennings piece. I was out at his football camp in Tennessee on Sunday. I'll put that in the description. So thanks, Larry. Everybody go check Larry out as well. Congratulations to you on 20K. I think it's almost dinner time on the West Coast. It's definitely dinner time where I'm at. It's already 7:40 p.m. So time to wrap it up. Larry, thanks so much again. Really appreciate your time, man.
Thanks, Dave. Have a great day, man. We'll see you next week.
All right. We'll talk to everybody soon.